The story begins at a gate, a slab of sun-baked metal painted the green of tired uniforms, its hinges tattooed with dust and thumb-thick rope where a chain has snapped and been knotted back together. On one side of the gate lies the garrison yard with its peeled barracks walls and a stack of fuel drums chalked with numbers. On the other side, the road buckles toward the river villages, where smoke trails thin as threads and the wind carries the tinny rattle of motorcycles that aren't supposed to be there. A woman named Awa arrives first, her headscarf gray with ash, her breath knifing in the dry heat. She presses both palms to the gate and calls through the diamond mesh, not loud, just steady. Please, they have come to the village. Please, the school is still open. The children are inside. Please. Their footsteps were on the gravel before the teachers could lock the doors. She waits for the clank of a latch, for a breath of mercy, for the door to become a door again. Inside the shade of the guardroom, a sergeant in a faded shirt looks up from a ledger. He knows Awa. He knows everyone from this stretch of the river, their family lines and the blue enamel pans they bring to market. He also knows the rule pinned above his desk in red ink. No deployment without stamped orders, no fuel release without a requisition slip, no exceptions. He points at the ledger with 2 fingers, not unkindly, and tells her that the captain has gone to the regional HQ for a briefing. The phrase hangs like a dry rag. Awa cups the mesh, her mouth close as if to kiss a reliquary, and says that they don't need a briefing, they need breath. Her voice cracks on the last word, and behind her, the village headman, a spare reed of a man with stubborn eyes, adds that the roadblock was lifted yesterday and the strangers came in at night. And the boys with them laughed like it was a game. He says he can smell gasoline under his nails from where he dragged a burning tire, and that the smell won't leave. The sergeant spreads his hands, palms upward, in that helpless half-shrug that uniformed people adopt when the door is not theirs to open. A radio crackles on a hook. Fatou, a radio operator with precise handwriting, and a child who has asthma, listens. There is a second voice in the room, the obstructive one, tidy and official. He belongs to a man named Kaba, an administrator who once wore a uniform and now wears a tie with a small badge on its knot. Kaba speaks like the ledger. He reminds the room that fuel releases were stolen last quarter, that the auditors humiliated the commandant, that the minister has sworn to end operations by rumor. He points to the drums. Each gallon must be signed for. Each mile must be justified. The gate groans as the wind shifts it, and the chain scrapes the pole. Breath turns thin. The story is told later, because stories are audits of the heart, as a lesson about sequence. In the villages, the system has a smell, a feel, a weight. It smells like diesel gone sour and paper warmed by fingers. It feels like mesh against your cheek and your tongue dry as paper. It weighs what a gate weighs when it is closed. Awa's plea meets that weight. The sergeant wants to move, and the men in the yard want the feel of rifles slinged properly, the relief of action. But the ledger sits between them and the road. The lesson, not yet learned, is that sometimes the ledger has to come after the breath. At that moment, though, the obstacle has a face and a desk fan that clicks. Kaba says the captain will return by evening. He says the protocol protects everyone. He says the last time someone rushed, civilians died at a fake checkpoint. He says the gate is not a gate but a safeguard. And the wind lifts another thread of smoke. The section closes with Awa stepping back, her eyes moving along the top edge of the gate as if measuring it, the headman counting under his breath, and Fatou's pencil hovering over the radio log where she has written 10:14. Villagers request escort, no order. Somewhere beyond the barracks wall, a child is coughing. The world keeps time with the cough. By noon, the heat throws knives. The road outside the garrison becomes a ledger of footprints and motorbike scars, a palimpsest of other days when relief arrived or didn't. A new line appears in Fatou's log, 11:03. WhatsApp voice note from teacher Miriam at the river school. We can hear them, that's all it says. On the small screen of her phone, the green waveform humps like dunes, and when she plays it back, the room can hear the thin echo of desks being dragged, the metal legs of a table scraping ground. The signal that desperate people still look for exquisitely ordinary tools. Fatou lifts her head to Kaba, whose tie knot gleams with a badge, and he replies with a clause from a directive. Escort operations are authorized only upon written request from a recognized authority with risk classification. He says it gently, almost like a lullaby, and then repeats it to the sergeant as if the repetition could make it less absurd. The villagers multiply. Men who had promised themselves they would never beg at a state gate form a line along the post's shadow, hats in hands. Market women who know how to set prices that hold through drought lean their forearms on the mesh and mutter calculations. 2 motorbikes, 6 men riding, maybe 8, plus the ones in the orchard. If they strike, how many minutes to the ferry dock? Someone says that if the soldiers will not come, the village will light tires on the highway until someone important calls back. Awa lowers her eyes and says softly that smoke does not teach mercy. She is a resilient person, which in this place means she has a habit of carrying other people's weight. She says the children will run to the river if they hear gunfire. She says she needs help to count them at the bend. Inside the yard, the captain's office remains still. The ceiling fan flips its blade of shade and light, and the clock makes the sounds of a metronome in an empty room. The men do what men do when they aren't allowed to move. They rehearse motion in their heads. They check straps and re-oil bolts. They walk the perimeter with their thumbs tucked beneath their belts. One peels an orange and leaves the rind segments on a crate to dry, as if he might return later with good news and a sweet to share. The sergeant confers with Fatu. He points at the ledger, and then, with a glance at the gate, at his chest. There are 2 ledgers in him, the one on the desk and the one that counts breaths. He knows which one matters, but not how to flip the order without breaking himself into a person he does not recognize. Kaba remains at the threshold, never inside enough to share guilt, never outside enough to share grief, arguing with a person on his phone. His language tightens into clauses. He mentions fuel chits, mentions the embarrassment of last quarter's scandal, mentions the need to protect the institution from populist theatrics. When he lowers his voice, the words small, corruption, and per diem hover like flies. The perverse incentive surfaces, not fully named. Commanders praised for low fuel consumption. Fuel cards funded late. Units measured by economy, not by lives delivered safely. In this arithmetic, delay is thrift and speed is recklessness. Outside this arithmetic is a sentence. The line at the gate shortens. The brave go back to fetch others, to herd the elderly away from crossfire, to carry the ledger of their own souls across open ground. Miriam, the teacher, sends a second voice note, closer this time. A blur of breath and a boy's whisper, "They are at the mango trees." The sergeant looks at Fatu. Fatu looks at the drums. She can feel each minute as a ring in the wood of the desk. She writes again. 12:22, second request, no order. Her pencil snaps. She sharpens it with a paring knife and smooths the page with a palm. If the story only had these pages, it would be an indictment in graphite. At the ferry dock, a fisherman named Mori speaks to his boat. He will later say that the river answered back. He ties knots the way old men pray, slowly and with care. Maury will eventually be the community voice at a hearing, but today he just stands with his hat brim pulled low, asking a system to breathe. The motorbikes near the school rev once, like a threat. The wind changes. In the guardroom, the radio growls with static, and then, clear as iron, a new voice breaks through. The aide to Ibrahim, a man named Amadou, speaks a sentence that does not fit inside any ledger. Hold the line. He is on his way. The breath people have been hoarding in their chests lurches. Even Kaba blinks and checks his watch. In the yard, men slide ammunition tins open like they are finally allowed to be as useful as the uniform promised. He arrives without trumpet in a dust-stained pickup that used to belong to a forestry brigade. The emblem still shows a tree with a circle around it, as if to bless shade. Ibrahim steps down wearing a shirt a shade darker than the road and shoes with dust at the seams, not the gleam of a parade. He has the face of a person who learned early to count forward from breath to breath. If he is mythic, it's because he speaks like a teacher before an exam. He walks to the gate first, before any office, and puts his hand where Awa's hand was earlier, feeling the residual heat, the shape of need impressed into metal. The chain looks back at him like a dare. He turns to the yard and says something so simple that it becomes devout. "We open this gate for breath. We put the ledger after." He does not shout. It lands like a bell. Kaba rushes forward with the posture of a rulebook, speaking about directives and authorizations. He fishes a folder from his bag, waving a clause. Ibrahim listens, because listening is an audit too. When Kaba finishes, Ibrahim thanks him for guarding the institution, then asks, gently, which institution his first loyalty serves. The paper, or the people whose taxes bought the paper? Kaba opens his mouth and closes it, like a fish adjusting in murky water. The soldiers wait for a bite or a release. Ibrahim turns to Fatu and asks for the radiolog. He reads the lines with the times and the penciled restraint. He looks at her pencil, still sharp from the knife, and says, "Your hand told the truth when your mouth could not." The room breathes differently. He orders a convoy with the calm of someone folding a shirt. 2 pickups, 1 ambulance that will be an ambulance because they say it is, 1 communications vehicle. He calls the first hour shield, 3 words he carries in a small notebook in his breast pocket. A protocol he has been mulling like bread dough. Treat first, secure first, escort first, brief and bill after. He tells Fatu to name it over the radio, to let the word travel faster than the trucks. He lifts the chain himself, hands under the knot where it was spliced, and the sergeant slides the gate until it makes a sound like relief. Men move. The yard empties itself onto the road in lines shaped by habit, and a happiness so restrained it feels like morning. The wind changes again, cooler now. Awa steps back from the mesh and covers her mouth. She had prepared arguments and a scream. She has no use for them in this moment. She says only, "The bend by the eucalyptus is where they like to stop people. The school door sticks. You must lift the latch slightly." Ibrahim nods, absorbing practical theology. He asks Maury if the ferry is ready to cut across if the road is blocked. Maury answers with the precise fuel estimate of a man who knows both river moods and human moods. Ibrahim assigns 2 soldiers to the ferry with a rope and a whistle. He tells the sergeant to count the children by shoes, not by faces, because shoes are easier when children hide their eyes. He gives out a metric like a prayer bead. Call to arrival? Less than 60 minutes. He says they will write it on the gate when they return. The number that proves a value has been kept. Amadou, the aide, stands with a small notebook and a pen that clicks. He writes orders that sound like stories. Lift the latch, count shoes, whistle on the ferry. They will later hang on a wall as if sacred. For now they animate motion. The convoy jolts forward. Ibrahim takes the seat in the second pickup, not the first. A choice the soldiers will discuss later in canteens as a lesson in humility and courage. It put him in reach. It put him with the radio. He keeps the handset to his ear and repeats the phrase like a metronome. First, our shield. When Kaba begins to call the regional HQ to protest, Ibrahim places a palm on the folder and tells him to come along. Kaba hesitates at the gate, foot on the threshold, the door between 2 versions of himself. He steps through. The gate, deprived of the weight of inaction, swings wider as if it too has lungs. On the road, the town listens. WhatsApp threads that had been specimens of despair reroute into commentary. A voice note captures the convoy's dust plume, and the murmurs that follow are a language invented that day. Relief edged with suspicion. Hope traced with fingers used to tracing scars. The motorcycles by the school bark and break away as the pickups tilt into the last bend. A woman who had hidden under a mango table peeks through the slats and sees uniforms in the face in the second truck, calm as a tax official. And she laughs without meaning to. The soldiers lift the sticky latch, just as Awa said. Inside the cinder block echo of the schoolroom, 32 children and 2 teachers count shoes and find 34 pairs. They search the broom closet and find a sleeping boy with 1 shoe clutched to his chest. When the ambulance that is an ambulance coughs to life, the road finally breathes like a lung after a long cough. They return the same day. The gate receives them open. The next morning the yard smells like dust washed with rain that never fell. People arrive to thank and to test. Journalists with notebooks creased from old use. Elders with robes that know now the fit of benches for long meetings. Market women who can argue down a fishmonger, and a minister with equal dexterity. Ibrahim stands not on a dais, but at the edge of the shade cast by the gate, the place where records are usually made. He holds a short hearing with a long table and no microphones. The artifacts spread across the surface are not dramatic, because truth hides in chores. Fatu's radio log with the 2 lines of refusal, the fuel requisition forms with boxes too small for human urgency, screenshots of WhatsApp voice notes printed out with timestamps and waveforms, a ledger page clean except for 1 column labeled Fuel Saved, with annotations in a careful hand. He asks the sergeant to describe the smell in the room at noon. The sergeant says it smelled like a fan belt heating to the edge of failure. The sentence lands with more authority than a policy brief. Amadou, the aide, with the clicking pen, leads the examination that will become folklore. He follows receipts, like a hunter follows a dry riverbed to a spring. He notes that the unit receives fuel on Monday, but commanders are praised on Friday for using less than forecast, as if under protection were thrift. He finds a clause in a procurement circular, Clause 7C, that ties discretionary benefits for officers to efficient resource. Husbandry, which in practice means staying in the yard, looks better on paper than racing to a village. He overlays this with logs. Spikes in requests for escorts coincide with days when fuel cards are empty. He reads aloud a message from a contractor with too many vowels in his Android email that refers to consolidated accounts and requests to defer. He stops before names, because naming bankers without a court is a kind of harm, but he names the mechanism. A gate became a ledger. A ledger became a choke. The gatekeepers were rewarded for withholding breath. The obstructive official, Kaba, sits on a plastic chair, his tie loosened, his face stripped of its armor by the truth of simple documents. He raises a hand and admits that he had, in meetings, praised commanders who returned unused fuel because the charts made him feel safe. He says the embarrassment after last quarter's scandal had eaten holes in his courage. He says that every institution chooses a god. For 3 months, they had worshipped a metric that could not comfort a child. The words don't excuse him, but they matter. Confession is not justice. It is an opening. Community voices rise, not as anger, but as inventory. Awa recounts the minutes between the first motorbike sound and the slam of the classroom door. She remembers how counting shoes steadied her, a habit as old as mornings. Maury the ferryman produces a small spiral notebook with fuel estimates, crossings, and names of pregnant women who should be given the ferry first. He flips to a page and taps a line. If soldiers do not come by the time the dust crosses the citrus grove, we cross anyway. The word dust becomes evidence. A teacher, Miriam, reads her voice notes out loud in the same tone she uses to read poems to the children. Her voice makes the ledger human. Ibrahim asks the garrison quartermaster to bring one drum forward. It thuds on the ground with a sound that becomes a verdict. He strokes the chalk numbers, then turns the drum so the sun catches a seam. He says that in their house, they will still count gallons, but differently. He gestures toward the gate and the school beyond, and says they will count breaths first, minutes second, and gallons third. He calls this the reordering of the sequence of care. When a lieutenant asks what to do if the fuel card is dry, Ibrahim answers with a rule. If it is the first hour and civilians are in danger, you move. You break the scarcity into pieces later in a room with people who can write. The gate is a gate again, not a shrine to a fearful number. They publish the audit in the easiest place to read, on the wall by the gate. 2 sheets, not glossy, affixed with tape that curls in the heat. It lists 3 findings and 3 actions, no names, just mechanisms. Journalists photograph it, and the photos circulate with the quiet force of sense. In the regional HQ, a clerk emails a link to a cousin with the subject line, "Finally, something that looks like us." The section doesn't end with applause, but with the scrape of a bench as people move closer to see the clauses that had choked them, now pinned like moths. Awa touches the paper with 2 fingers, the way she had touched the gate. She breathes out, the kind of breath you didn't know you held until someone hands it back. The reform is not a speech. It begins with paint and chalk. On the gate, a rectangle is rolled in white, a space for a board. The soldiers laugh at the brightness until the sun dims it. Fatu, now the keeper of clocks, writes in block letters across the top. First hour shield, public metrics. Beneath it, 3 lines that are daily prayers for a secular house. Call to arrival, minutes. Escorts denied, last 24. Complaints resolved, to date. The numbers will change each morning, a simple ritual that installs a conscience. Beside the board, a phone number is posted, a hotline that rings in 3 places at once. The garrison desk, Amadou's pocket, and the ombuds's office in town. The SLA is printed beneath it like a vow. We call you back within 2 hours. We log every name. Inside the office, the ledger no longer begins with fuel. A 1-page order, stamped with a kind of stamp that used to blot meaning, now reads as a promise. Golden hour protocol. Treat, secure, escort first, brief and bill after. The funding path changes with a stroke that took 2 nights of phone calls and 1 meeting where someone raised their voice and then apologized. Fuel cards are decoupled from unit discretion. A central pool dispatches amounts based on calls answered, not gallons hoarded. The perverse incentive, commendations for fuel, savings, is publicly banned. The word banned, written big enough to blot the ghosts. In its place, an award no one has seen before takes form. A ribbon sewn from a scrap of faded forestry brigade cloth, given to units whose board shows low call to arrival and honest counting of denials with reasons. Pride finds a new object. Training drills begin on Tuesdays at 7. They are embarrassingly simple by design, and therefore repeated without resistance. A teacher locks a door. A soldier lifts a latch that sticks. Someone counts shoes. Maury blows the ferry whistle. Fatu simulates call logs and writes times. Kaba, because redemption has to be practiced, plays the role of the bureaucrat, and then plays the role of the runner who fetches rope. He learns how shame can be turned into muscle. Children watch from the threshold and clap on the beat of the whistle. The drills take 13 minutes, a number that becomes a shared joke and a goal. Posters appear in kiosks and barber stalls that say, 13 minutes to remember who we are. Enforcement arrives not as thunder, but as consistency. A small audit team, 3 women and 2 men, visits gates unannounced with clipboards and patience. They compare the board's numbers to the radiolog's handwriting, then to the stories in the market shade. When they find drift, they do not perform humiliation, they perform correction. But there are also consequences. A commander who falsifies a board is suspended. The announcement is read out at evening parade with no relish in the voice. The prosecution of the contractor who gamed fuel deliveries is slow and legal, not a spectacle. His punishment is printed in small font in the Gazette, which is how grown cultures register disapproval. The public learns the new lexicon. Market women ask in the same tone they use for tomatoes, "What's your call to arrival today?" Taxi drivers compare the numbers at competing gates like a sport. Community radio reads out the denials column and the reasons, which are terse and honest. Ambush en route, rerouted via river. Dispute not security related, referred to mediation, request withdrawn, family reunited. The transparency turns rumor into work. People complain less and complain better. Ibrahim visits the gate at odd hours. He does not announce. He leans on the post and watches. In one visit, he hears a boy recite a poem about a door that remembers hands. In another, he overhears a soldier explaining the difference between a gate and a wall. Amadou collects fragments of such sentences and loops them back into training. The metrics board gains a fourth small line penciled in at the bottom by Fatou. Breaths returned, with a count that no one can fully verify but everyone understands. It isn't a tally of lives saved, not precisely, but a moral arithmetic that satisfies something ancient and immediate. The reform's most delicate part is culture, because systems do not change until a person at a threshold changes how they breathe. Awa is hired part-time by the Ombuds office to listen to voice notes. She insists they hear all accents with equal patience. Miriam brings her class to the gate on a field trip and asks Ibrahim to explain the metrics board as if it were a map. He tells them that numbers are only good when they obey breath. He tells them the board is a mirror, and they should complain when the mirror fogs. The section closes with a quiet day when the board reads a clean 0 under denials, the chalk squeaking as Fatou draws a line, and the gate sleeping open on its hinges like a sigh. It is a year later, and boredom has acquired a good reputation. The sun still bleaches paint. The white rectangle on the gate has been repainted 3 times, and the board now has a small roof of tin to keep the numbers legible during the short rains. People who once avoided the garrison now come to lean on the mesh and talk about harvest yields and school recitals. The public metric ritual has found its rhythm. Fatou, who now trains younger operators, hands the chalk to a new recruit at dawn and watches him write the numbers with the care of a calligrapher. He erases a smudge with his thumb, the gesture small and exact. The gate opens at 7 with no ceremony, as dependable as laundry lines. This is what reform looks like when it becomes culture. A door that forgets it was ever a wall. The habits have spread not by decree but by imitation. The clinic in the ward adopts a copy of the board for emergencies, with a line called door to needle, and the nurses grin when their times improve. The registry office steals the complaint SLA and puts it next to the counter where people argue about spellings of names. Rivertown, 2 districts away, which used to be a byword for delay, paints its gate with its own board and calls their protocol First Light. The names differ. The rhythm is the same. In staff rooms and after prayers, people compare their numbers without malice. Transparency has made a sport of decency. And there are still nights when motorcycles cough where they shouldn't, when the radio raises the hairs on arms, when the convoy has to leave before coffee cools. On those nights, the sequence holds. Call to arrival under 60, shoes counted, latches lifted, ferries tied, just so. Rumors still blow across the district like dust storms, but the public board tethers talk to something firm. There is gossip about a commander who padded his numbers. The audit team catches it, and he is quietly replaced. The disappointment is crisp and brief because the system swallowed it. In the market, the fishmonger raises prices for no reason, and a woman points at the board and says, "Laughter can be honest too." They bargain down. Awa has a new job title she didn't ask for, community liaison, and a stack of notebooks that smell like pencil shavings. She keeps lists of people who say thank you, not because gratitude is a metric, but because it is a counterweight to the heaviness of days. She still counts shoes when she is anxious. Miriam's class has memorized the instructions for lifting sticky latches. Maury has replaced the whistle with a bell cut from a broken cooking pot. It rings with a domestic note that people like. Kaba arrives at work early now, his tie loose and his face more spacious. When he sees a clerk celebrating a low fuel bill, he taps the board and says, gently, "This is the God we serve." He says it with a smile that took practice. Ibrahim walks less like a storm and more like a habit. He attends fewer hearings because there are fewer hearings to attend. Sometimes he stands at the edge of the yard and watches a morning drill, hands in pockets, the kind of posture that says, "We are not heroes. We are custodians." Amadou maintains a small online dashboard that anyone can check on their phones, 3 numbers and a graph that is shy of drama. The line of call to arrival has flattened near the target. Denials pop and subside like small waves. Complaints resolved climb steadily, unromantic and honest. The data is not art, but it is a kind of poem where each stanza says someone arrived. The final breath belongs to the gate. A child, a boy no one notices until he is halfway grown, runs his fingers over the cool morning paint and asks his mother what this board is for. She says it is for keeping promises. He nods and then asks why the soldiers write the numbers in public. She answers that it is so a door can remember hands. He accepts this and drags his stick in the dust to draw his own board with boxes and lines, and he fills it with invented numbers. He gets bored, and bored is good. When the wind lifts, the tin roof rattles lightly, a reassuring clatter, and the ferry bell rings once from the river. Habits hold. The mesh warms. A teacher passing by greets the guard. A ledger sits open on the desk with its first line blank, waiting for breath to come before ink. The boredom of a good system rests on 6 words painted above the chalk lines, words that moved from mouth to board to culture. First hour shield, breath before billing. And the gate, almost smug with usefulness, slides easily on its track. When gates remember hands and ledgers learn to breathe, communities do more than survive. They choose each other, again and again. If this story moved you, carry it forward. And if you liked the video, then like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your voice helps honest systems spread, one open door at a time.